Good morning. I'm Pat Crosswhite, and it's my honor to read the scripture this morning. It's from Lamentations, chapter 3, verses 19 through 24. I remember my affliction and my wandering, the bitterness and the gall. I well remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion. Therefore, I will wait for him. This is the word of the Lord for the people of God.
Amen. Thank you, Pat. Thank you. Well, this morning we will be looking through the book of Lamentations. But hey, if I haven't met you before, my name is Brian. And if you are new with us and don't know this, because I feel like I talk about it a lot, but I am from Michigan, from the Detroit area of Michigan. And one thing about that area that pertains to most of us is that we grew up in car culture. We grew up around cars and liking muscle cars. And so my entire life, all I wanted was fast and loud cars. Didn't care anything else about them. I just wanted fast and loud cars. So from the age of probably, 19 to 21, I was able to do some of that. I at different times had a couple Camaros, a Mustang, and a couple trucks, and they were awesome. I loved them. But my favorite of all was a black Camaro. It was not great. Not in the best shape, not that fast, but for me it was fast. And I just loved this car. And I'd put all of my time and effort into making this car what I wanted it to be. However, at that same time, I was working as a mechanic. That's what I wanted to do my whole life growing up. So I was working as a mechanic. And one thing I learned is that oftentimes people that work on cars for a living do a really poor job maintaining their own cars. And so I'd spend my time fixing and maintaining other people's cars, but when it came to my own car, the only thing I cared about was that it was fast, that it was loud, that it was cooler than my buddies' cars, and that's about it. But I put very little effort into actually maintaining and caring for this car. And now, you see, as time went on with this car, things started to break and deteriorate. The windows stopped working. The speakers started not working. At one point, I brought it into the shop I worked at and put it up in the air and took out the drain plug to change the oil, and out came, instead of a brown or a black oil, out came this milky white oil, which tells me that there's coolant in the oil, which tells me a head gasket or an intake gasket. Something wrong is going on. And so what did I do? I put the drain plug back in, I filled it up with oil, and I drove away. And it ran fine. It seemed to be just fine. But I did very little to actually maintain and care for this car. But then when things started to break down, and when things started to actually not work, when I'd go out to start my car to go to work and it wouldn't start, or when it would break down, I would just get so frustrated with this car. I'd be like, this is such a hunk of junk. I can't believe that this car is doing this to me. And I'd get so frustrated with this car because it wasn't doing the things that I wanted it to do. When in the meantime, I was putting all my time and effort to making it look nice, to making it sound, try and make it quicker, but put very little to no effort into actually making it live longer, or actually making it healthy, or actually making it maintained, and actually making it do what it's supposed to do. And you see, I would just get frustrated with this car. I would get mad at it, thinking that it's unreliable, it's unfaithful, it's the problem, when in reality, I was the one who wasn't doing the things that I needed to do to maintain that car. And I think oftentimes life can feel like that. We can look to God and we can look at our situation around us and see that things are going wrong, things aren't going the way we want them to go, and we can say, God, how could you be this unfaithful to me? How could you do this to me? How is life turning out this way for me? But in the meantime, I'm not putting in the work from my end. I'm not maintaining that relationship. I'm not being faithful to God, but I'm blaming him for the state of where things are. You see, today as we continue our series that we've been going through in the fruit of the Spirit, these are attributes that Paul lists in Galatians, that if we are living a life walking in the Holy Spirit, that we will embody these attributes. It is not through our own strength or not through our own just doing a really great job and living these out, but it is in releasing that control and living a life that is led by the Spirit. And in the series, we've been walking through each of these each week, and today we're going to be looking at this idea of faithfulness. And I think for us to look at the idea of faithfulness, we have to look at it through two lenses. We need to look at God's faithfulness to us, and then our faithfulness back to God. And so we're going to do that today by looking through the book of Lamentations. Now, what we're going to do this morning is we are actually going to look through and study through the whole book of Lamentations. We're not going to read the whole thing for time's sake, but we're just going to do an overview, a survey of the entire book to see what we can learn regarding our own faithfulness and also God's faithfulness to us through this book. So Lamentations, it's not the most commonly read book. It's not the book that you're just most of the time going to want to crack open in the morning to just have a really fun start to your day. But it is an extremely important book. What it is, if you're unfamiliar, is it is a lament, which a lament is just a passionate expression of sorrow. And it is a book of laments. It is a cry out to God regarding the destruction of Jerusalem. That's what's going on as we get into this book. So we're going to do this overview of this book. And so where we are in the story here, there's some kind of debate about this, but many people believe that Jeremiah is the one that wrote Lamentations. So the way we can look at Lamentations is kind of like an epilogue to the book of Jeremiah. If we read the book of Jeremiah, it's 52 chapters, spend all our time reading it, then Lamentations could kind of be just the end, the epilogue of what happens next, or the response to what happens next. And so as Jeremiah is writing this, what's happened so far in his life and in this situation is Jeremiah had been prophesying for 40 years for the Israelites, for the people to turn back to God, and if they don't, that there would be this coming destruction. So for 40 years, he was ignored. For 40 years, he was ridiculed. For 40 years, he was not listened to. 40 years, he was not listened to. And then at the end of these 40 years comes this destruction, and that is where we pick up in the story. So over the span of 2 years, the Babylonians sieged and took captive the people of Jerusalem. And that's what is going on as we jump into this. In fact, we're actually going to turn back a couple pages in our Bibles. These verses will be up on the screen, but you can turn there as well, to the end of Jeremiah, chapter 52, where we're just going to get kind of an idea of what happens right before now, right? What's going on in the story, what's going on in the life as we jump into Lamentations. So Jeremiah 52, starting in verse 4. Says, "So in the 9th year of Zedekiah's reign, in the 10th day of the 10th month, Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, marched against Jerusalem with his whole army. They encamped outside the city and built siege works all around it. The city was kept under siege until the 11th year of King Zedekiah. And by the 9th day of the 4th month, the famine in the city had become so severe that there was no food for people to eat. Then the city wall was broken through, and the whole army fled." So what's happening here is what they're engaging in is what's called siege warfare. So what happens, just a long story short, is the Babylonians came, they surround the city of Jerusalem, and basically from there, it's a waiting game. It's a waiting game to see who can survive the longest. Because as they surround the city, they're cutting off the food supply. And so then it's just who's going to run out of food first. Does the army surrounding the city, if they run out of food first, they can get food brought in, but if they run out of food first, then they're going to retreat, and they're going to leave, and they fail. But if they can wait it out long enough, then the food supply within the city dwindles, and the food supply in the city goes down far enough to where the people either have a choice to surrender or to die. And so that is what is happening here. That is what they did. They surround the city, and for 2 years they surrounded the city, cut off food supply, and waited for the food to run out. And then if we skip down a few verses to verse 12 in Jeremiah 52, it says, "In the 10th day of the 5th month, in the 19th year of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon, Nebuzaradan, commander of the imperial guard, who served the king of Babylon, came to Jerusalem. He set fire to the temple of the Lord, the royal palace, and all the houses of Jerusalem. Every important building he burned down. The whole Babylonian army, under the commander of the imperial guard, broke down all the walls around Jerusalem." So what we see here is the temple has been destroyed, the city is burned, the people are taken into captivity. And we don't know this for sure, but tradition tells us that Jeremiah from a cave just north of Jerusalem, looking out over his city burning and over the people being taken captive. And that is where we meet him today. See, I encourage you this week as homework to go and read the book of Lamentations straight through. It'll probably take you about 20, 25 minutes. And if possible, read it out loud. Now, I'll be honest with you, if you've never read it before, there's some very adult themes in it, so it's not one to read with the kids necessarily, or with young kids. but to just read through it. So, and I think this does, and what it did for me is doing it this week, is it really helped give a good picture of the emotion that Jeremiah would have been feeling at this time. See, Lamentations it's called Lamentations because it is poetry of lament. But the word Lamentations, that title, we actually get from the Septuagint, which is the Greek translation of the Hebrew Bible. In the Hebrew Bible, the word that is given to this book is the word ekha, and it is translated as just how. How. And if we were to read through the whole book, we would see that chapters 1, 2, and 4 start with that word, how. And I think that is a really good way to sum up this book. It is Jeremiah looking over his city and just asking God, how? How did we get to where we are today? In fact, there's a famous painting painted by Rembrandt in the 1600s, which is a picture of it when you put it up on the screen. This is called Jeremiah Lamenting the Destruction of Jerusalem. And as this was painted in the 1600s, I think Rembrandt did a really great job at just capturing the emotion that Jeremiah was probably feeling. See, what I think is interesting here is he's not sitting here crying out to God. He's not sitting here protesting. He's not sitting here in anger. He just is defeated. The book that he's leaning against is actually titled Bible, but what most likely that was intended to be is him leaning just against the book of Lamentations, or the book of Jeremiah that he has written. And it is him crying out to God, him crying out to God for the state that they're in, but ultimately just putting his head in his hands and just saying, how? How? And I'm curious if you've ever felt like this painting depicts. If you've ever felt this just dejected, depressed. If you've ever felt like that you're in a place where there's just no coming back from. And obviously this is an artist's rendition, but I think this is a really good picture of what Jeremiah was probably feeling at this time. Or just asking God, how did we get to where we are today? And so this is the state in which we find Jeremiah, and this is the state that we can imagine and picture as we start reading Lamentations chapter 1. So we're going to start here this morning with the first few verses of the book of Lamentations. If you don't have a Bible, if you'd like to follow along with us, there are blue Bibles in the seats around you, underneath the seats, and the page number for that blue Bible will be up on the screen. But we're going to start at the beginning of Lamentations, and we're going to jump to a few different places here. And we're going to start here in verse 1. How deserted lies the city, once so full of people. How like a widow is she, who once was great among the nations. She was the queen among the provinces, and now become a slave. Bitterly she weeps at night, tears are on her cheeks. Among all her lovers there is no one to comfort her. All her friends have betrayed her, and have become her enemies. After affliction and harsh labor, Judah has gone into exile. She dwells among the nations. She finds no resting place. All who pursue her have overtaken her in the midst of her distress. The roads to Zion mourn, for no one comes to her appointed festivals. All her gateways are desolate. Her priests groan, her young women grieve, and she is in bitter anguish. Her foes have become her master. Her enemies are at ease. The Lord has brought her grief because of her many sins. Her children have gone into exile, captive before the foe. See, what Jeremiah knows, and what I think we can see here as we just get into these first couple verses of this book, is that faithlessness leads to destruction. Faithlessness leads to destruction, and that is the state that they had found themselves in now. Jeremiah had been warning about the faithlessness of the people for 40 years, and ultimately that faithlessness led them to a state of destruction. His warnings were never heeded, and it led them to where they were today. See, God had been faithful to his people, but they were the ones that turned away. So I think the question to ask as we get into this, as we look at the faithlessness of the people, is to ask ourselves, where have I been unfaithful? Where have I been unfaithful to God? See, if we need to kind of define it, I think faithfulness can be best defined as just steadfast loyalty. So where have I been unloyal to God? Not just in the good times. Have I had this steadfast loyalty not just in the good times, but in the bad and the hard times? See, faithlessness always leads to destruction. And I think it could be easy for us to look at the state that they were in, of getting destroyed, of being led into captivity, and think, God, how would you allow this to happen? How could a loving God allow this to happen? But we can forget that for 40 years, they were warned that this would be coming. They were warned and encouraged and begged to stay faithful and to turn back to God. See, I'm not even 40 yet. But so their entire life, or my entire life, would be more than my entire life, they were asked and told to turn back to God. But they didn't. And ultimately it led to their destruction. See, this is not a knee-jerk reaction from God. This is decades of warnings that were ignored. Their faithlessness led to their destruction. So the question is, where have we been unfaithful to God? I think it's easy to think about being faithful to God in the hard times of life. Sometimes that's the easiest times to be faithful, is when things are hard and we feel like we have nowhere else to turn. And sometimes the hardest times to be faithful to God is when things are all just looking fine. When we're healthy, when we're happy, when we have the things that we need, sometimes that's the hardest time to look to God, because I feel like, I've got everything I need. I don't need God. I'll come back when I need something from you. But that steadfast loyalty means that we are loyal, means that we are faithful to God, both in the good times and in the bad, when things are easy and when things are hard. So the reality is we have all had times that we have been faithless. We have all had times that we have lacked faith. And so the invitation to you and to me is to simply come back, is to turn back, to repent, to confess, to turn back to God and have that faithfulness in him again. But what we see is that even though Jeremiah had been ignored and ridiculed for decades and is mourning and lamenting the destruction of Jerusalem, he still recognizes that God is faithful even when we are not. He still recognizes that God's faithfulness is not dependent on our faithfulness. And we can see that as we skip a couple pages over to chapter 3 of Lamentations, as we read again what Pat read for us this morning. See, we can see in the midst of his sorrow and in his pain that he still recognizes the faithfulness of God. Lamentations chapter 3, starting in verse 19. I remember my affliction and my wandering, the bitterness and the gall. I well remember them, and my soul is downcast within me. Yet this I call to mind, and therefore I have hope. Because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed, for his compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. I say to myself, the Lord is my portion, therefore I will wait for him. So you know what's interesting here? This section is right in the center of the book. It's like the peak of Lamentations. It's right in the middle of the middle chapter, where we can see all around this, we see him lamenting the destruction, crying out to God, but right in the midst of this pain and suffering, right in the midst of all these emotions, right at the center is God, you have been faithful. God, because of your great love, we are not consumed. Your compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. And you know what? These are really great verses. These are really great verses that you could put on a mug. These are good verses that you could put up on a wall. And these are verses that you could easily take out of context. And this is one of the rare instances where if you took these verses out of context, they still apply, and you'll be fine. But in doing that, I think we can forget the magnitude of the situation that they were in. That this is not, God, great is your faithfulness, and I'm saying that in the time where I'm just happy and all the things are going well. But this is in the midst of death, in the midst of suffering, in the midst of everything that I know, everything around me burning to the ground. Even still in the midst of that, I can say, great is your faithfulness. See, have you ever gone through a situation where you felt as if you were totally consumed? Where you felt like you were completely underwater? So he says, because of the Lord's great love, we are not consumed. But I bet you've been in that situation before where you feel like you're just drowning. Like the weight of the world is on you. Like no matter what you do, you can't get your head above water. Like you are totally consumed. But no matter what situation you are going through, no matter where you find yourself in life, you are not fully consumed. You are not completely consumed, but you are not consumed because of how strong you are or because of how much you can get through it. You are not consumed because of his great love. Because his love for you is greater than whatever you feel is consuming you. Because his compassion for you is new every morning. God's compassion, his mercy, his love, his faithfulness is new every single morning. Every single morning. That means it doesn't matter what yesterday looked like. It doesn't matter what a week ago looked like. It doesn't matter what 2 decades ago looked like. His mercy and love and compassion for you is new every single morning. That means it doesn't matter what today looks like. It means tomorrow morning that his compassion, that his mercy, his forgiveness is new for you every single morning. Every morning. No matter what it looks like, in the midst of pain and destruction, his mercy and his faithfulness is renewed, is new for you every single day. See, Psalm 23 tells us that his goodness and mercy will follow us all the days of my life. See, if we have turned away from him, it is not too late to turn back. While we are still breathing, it is not too late to turn back to him. It is not too late to experience his love and his mercy every single day. And this is something that, well, we can get excited about a lot of things, and we're going to get excited about some things here in a little bit as we celebrate baptisms. This is one of the things that we should get most excited for in our faith. It's that we can come to God, no matter how many times we've turned away from him. We can come back, and every day his mercy is new for us, every single day. Every day. Unbelievable. Unbelievable. Every single morning. But the reality is that I understand that that can be hard to recognize sometimes. That if you are in the midst of that feeling fully consumed, if you are in the midst of that pain and suffering, it can be easy to say his mercies are new every morning, but when you wake up and you don't feel it, when you wake up and you're still in pain, that it's hard to recognize that. That it's hard to recognize his daily mercies when you're in the midst of pain and suffering. And so as we move to the end of the book of Lamentations, as we turn another page or two over, as we look at the end of Lamentations chapter 5, we're going to see what it looks like to wait faithfully on the Lord, even when we have no idea what the outcome will be. Lamentations chapter 5, starting in verse 19, just the last section of the book. He writes, "You, Lord, reign forever. Your throne endures from generation to generation. Why do you always forget us? Why do you forsake us so long? Restore us yourself, Lord, that we may return. Renew our days as of old." And this is one of my favorite books in the entire Bible. One of my favorite verses in the entire Bible. "Unless you have utterly rejected us and are angry with us beyond measure." See, what we see here is we see no bow on the story. We see no happy, just everything works out in the end of the book of Lamentations. What we see is him crying out to God. What we see is him being faithful even though he has no idea what the future will hold. See, I think it's important for us to remember that faithfulness does not always mean that our situation will improve. Faithfulness to God does not always mean that the situation will improve. It does not equal happiness. Jeremiah was faithful to the Lord. He was faithful, and he did what the Lord called him to do, and he spent his entire life in pain and suffering, being ridiculed, called the weeping prophet. He was faithful, and at the end of the day, he watched his people die and his city burn. See, our faithfulness is not measured by how quickly life improves for us. Our faithfulness is not measured by how quickly life improves, but it is our loyalty in the midst of pain. See, faithfulness is steadfast loyalty even when we can't see the road ahead. Faithfulness is loyalty to God. It is being steadfast, loyal to him, even when we have no idea what the future will be. Even when we have no idea what the outcome will be. See, if you are in a place where you are having trouble remembering the faithfulness of God, I want to first say, I understand, and I've been there. If you are in a state today where you're just having trouble recognizing and remembering what the faithfulness of God looks like, I think it's important this week to spend some time lamenting well. Spend some time in sorrow. Spend some time crying out to God and recognizing those God-given, real human emotions. But I also think it's healthy and it's good to take some time and look back over your life at where God has been faithful in the past. To look back over your life. It's this idea of kind of like writing a letter to your younger self. Of looking back over your life and saying, where has God been faithful to me? Even though right now I might not feel it, right now I might be right in the midst of pain, but where has God been at work throughout my life, and how did that get me to where I am today? So what I'd like to do is I'd like to take you through my life and show you what that looks like for me. Because there's been many times in my life where I sat there thinking, God, I have no idea what the path forward looks like, and blaming him. I didn't understand what the path forward looks like. But now being able to look back and seeing how he was working every step. And so I want to walk you through what it looked like for myself and my wife to come into being in ministry in general, and how that worked out for us, and how we were able to see God working throughout our entire lives. See, back, 13 years ago or so, my wife and I, we were married. We were early in our marriage at that time. And we were at the state where we wanted to change churches. We had grown up in a church, this specific church, our entire lives. Our parents still went there. And we wanted to go somewhere new, somewhere that we could experience something new. And so we tried out this church that was about a half hour or so from our house. It was a church called 242 in Michigan. It was a large church. We went there. It was nice. It was fine. But afterwards, we were wandering around, and they had a lot of stuff that goes on during the week, so we were just kind of touring the building, seeing what was going on. And this guy came up to us, and he had a little greeter tag. And he said, "Hey, would you like me to show you around?" I have no idea what this guy's name was. Could not picture him. I have no idea anything about him. But we said, sure. So he showed us around. We were looking at all the things and seeing how nice the church was and so forth. And then in conversation, it came up where we lived. And we told him the city we lived in and the crossroads and so forth. And he stops. And he goes, "Oh, you shouldn't go to church here." I'm like, what? He said, no, there's this church that's planting, this church starting like a mile from your house. You shouldn't come back here. You should look them up and go there. Now, to me, I had grown up in church. I had grown up in a very large church, and also at the same time grew up going to a Christian school that was tied to a very small kind of fundamental Baptist church. And in my mind, I had never heard of the concept of a church starting. I had never heard of a church planting, starting. Churches were just churches. And what's there is there. And so I looked them up, and it turns out it was like less than a mile from our house. They were meeting in a community college auditorium. And then in looking a little further, we found that the pastor, the guy that was planting the church, was an acquaintance of ours, an old friend of my sister's that I kind of knew through that relationship. And so we sent them a message and said, like, "Hey, can people just come to this? I don't understand what's happening. Can we just come?" And he's like, "Yeah, of course." So we came. The church was called Mile City Church because up in that area of Michigan, there's mile roads. There's 4 mile, 5 mile, 6 mile, 7 mile, 8 mile, and so forth. And so it was like where all these converge, and so they called themselves the Mile City. So Mile City Church. And we went to this preview service of theirs, and we were sitting there, and it was great, but things were kind of clunky. The transitions weren't great. It didn't have this polished, everything perfect look to it that we were used to, that I was used to. The pastor got up and he kind of stuttered. And things were just like, it looked like people running this, like people doing these things and not just the machine. And afterwards, Brittany, my wife, and I, we were talking, and we went up to him, and I told him, like, you asked for people to join this team. I don't know what joining a team means. I don't know what this means, but we're in. Like, I don't even know what in means, but we're in, and we're here just for whatever you want, because this is unlike anything I've ever seen before. And so we came on with them. We started leading a small group in our home. We were just volunteering. Their kids director ended up getting really sick, and Brittany stepped in her place to help lead their kids ministry for a while. We were with them for a year after their launch. Our last Sunday with them before moving to North Carolina was their 1-year anniversary, and they brought us up on stage and sent us off. It was very nice and kind of them. But in the midst of all that, we had decided to move to North Carolina, and one of my requirements for moving here is I was like, we need to find another church to help start. We need to find another church to help plant, because that just revitalized, renewed my faith, and I want to be a part of this again. And so we were looking online, and Brittany ended up finding this church that was looking for a kids director, and we were interviewing with them and talking with them via Zoom. And we moved down here, and we started doing things with them, and it was great. And they were called Interstate Church. And we were excited. They hadn't launched yet, but we were doing things. They were much earlier in the process. We were just kind of figuring things out. And at first, it was really great, and we were doing a lot of things with them. And I realized that at the time I worked in financial services, and we were trying to open up this office down here and figure out how to get clients and start this thing. And every time I was working over here in finance, I just kept thinking, man, I wish I was doing stuff over there with the church. I just keep feeling like I'm wasting my time doing other things. I feel like should be over here. And eventually I went to Brittany and I said, I don't really know what being called to ministry means, but it kind of feels like that. It kind of feels like this, like I should be doing things over here. And so we talked through it, and we pretty much decided we need to either dive headfirst into one or the other. And so we decided to dive headfirst into ministry. And so we went, begged our landlord to let us out of the lease for the office, and he was very kind and let us out. Sold off all the furniture we had just bought for the office at a huge loss, and got just like a job to pay the bills, and started looking at what does it mean to be in ministry. And we started doing things with them, and it was great at first. But then time started to go on. And some of the things that we realized that we were told from far away ended up not being true. That relationship between us and the people starting the church started to deteriorate as we felt like there were things that we were told that weren't necessarily truthful. There's some belief differences that were bigger than we realized from afar. Things came and went. Our launch day that was supposed to happen came and went. It never happened. And eventually got to the point where we had to go to them and say, look, I don't think this is a good relationship. I think we need to part ways. And we stepped away from them. And so here we were in this new state, where living with my wife's sister and her family, because we didn't know where to go. I had just convinced her to give up on our career, to give up on this career that we weren't making a ton of money, but we had a career path ahead of us, and we knew where we were going. To throw all that away, to go into this ministry idea that had just blown up in our face. And I remember Christmas of that year, sitting there thinking, I'm pretty sure I just ruined my family's life. I'm pretty sure I just made a decision that is going to completely tank us. And in that time, I was praying and crying out to God, saying, I thought I was doing the faithful thing. I thought giving my life to ministry, that was being faithful. And where's the reciprocation? I thought that we were doing the right thing, and then everything just blew up in our face. And I spent that new year online searching, as we were new to the area, living in Morrisville, searching online for churches starting near me, churches starting in Raleigh, because I didn't know anything. I didn't know the area. I didn't have any relationships down here outside of the family that we were with, and had no idea what to do next. And so I spent that season applying to jobs at churches for things like janitor, for things like desk work, for things that I was thinking, if I can just get in the door, then maybe that's the answer. But I have no idea what this next step looks like. And I was in that season where, God, I thought I was being faithful, but the road ahead is just complete fog, and I have no idea what to do next. And so that season, I kept just looking for churches, sending messages to churches saying, hey, I don't care about a job. I don't care about any of that. Can we just come and attend? And not getting calls back, not getting emails back. Until I found this one church in Raleigh that was a ways away from where we were living. And they were planting sometime in a handful of months. And so I sent them a message just saying, hey, I see that it looks like you're starting. Can we just come? Is that okay? And they sent a message back, which any church planter would do, saying, yeah, of course, just come. We have nobody, we'd want people to come. And so they invited us over for dinner, and we went and met them and started attending their little services in their townhome, and ended up planting this church called New City Church in Raleigh. It's still there today. And as we came on board with them, we had no idea what ministry meant, what that even looked like. The first responsibility that they asked me to do is go figure out where to buy a tent from, like the tent we have outside, but way cheaper. And so I was like, okay, I can buy a tent. And so it was just these little steps of okay, I think that this is the right path. And then over years went on and ended up becoming a pastor with them and becoming their executive pastor and so forth. And then at the end of the day, ended up moving to Holly Springs a couple years ago. And in moving, my wife and I felt very confident that this was the step that the Lord wanted us to take, to move here. We were both in agreement about that. We felt very confident in that direction from the Lord. But in doing so, that meant that we were very far from the church. And so we decided that it would be best to step off, that we're not in the community of that church anymore. And so I can't effectively pastor a community that I don't live in. And so we stepped off, and we lived out here in Holly Springs. And it was kind of a state of, God, I feel very called to be out here, but I don't know what that means pastor-wise. I don't know what that looks like ministry-wise, because I feel like you specifically called us to this town, and that narrows it down quite a bit when we look at churches around us. We didn't feel like God was sending us out to another state to move somewhere else. We felt called to be right here. And so we pretty much just said, God, if this is the end of the road, ministry-wise for us, then I guess that's our answer. But if you want this to continue, then you'll open up a door for us. And we started attending this church that was walking distance from our house called Lake Springs Church. And we started walking here and coming because we had always been a half hour plus from home. And so we were like, if you can walk to church, that's just the best scenario. And so we started coming here and just attending and getting involved. And then all of a sudden, one day, there was a job posting that pretty much almost word for word outlined the exact job that I had just left, the responsibilities that I had at my other church. We thought, God, this seems very coincidental. That it is like I wrote my previous job description and published it. And it's the church that we're attending that we could walk to. And so we spoke with the leadership and ended up coming on board and have been here for the past couple years. And that turned into the executive pastor position, and over time turned into the lead pastor position. But you see, from where we are right now, I can look back, and there are multiple times throughout that journey that I sat there saying, God, what are you doing? Why? I feel like there is no direction in front of us. I feel like we're doing the right things. I feel like I've held up my end of the bargain, but why aren't you holding up yours? And I can look back and trace this all the way back to this one guy at this one church that we visited one week, that was not concerned about growing the church he was at, that was not concerned about just getting people in the door, but was more concerned about being faithful to what he felt the Lord was calling him to say. And what he did is he sent us on a trajectory. The Lord did, but through him sent us on a trajectory that got us to here today. And you know what's funny? In the midst of that, the church we were at before, the church that we were at before this one, through relationships that we had there, we ended up over time becoming foster parents, and we ended up meeting this woman through that church that ultimately asked us to adopt her son. And so I can look at Theo, at my son, and I can say, if this one guy wasn't faithful to the Lord all these years ago, I may have never even met my son. It all traces right back to him. And all traces right back to the Lord being faithful in every situation, even when I turned my back on him, even when I cried out to him, even when I said, God, you're not doing the things that you're supposed to do. This is where the Lord has been faithful. And this helps me in times where I feel like, where do I go next? In times like I feel like, God, what are you doing? To look back and say, I felt that many times. But now looking back, that feels really silly. Now looking back, I can see that he was at work every step of the way. See, God has been faithful to me and has been faithful to you every step of the way. But you might not always feel it. You might not always feel like you're in that state. In fact, you might be here today and you might be right in the midst of Lamentations chapter 1. You might be right in the midst of those verses where you just feel pain. Either pain because of the situation around you or pain because of something within you, but you just feel pain and you are crying out to God and you are agonizing and lamenting over the pain that you feel right now. You might be this morning sitting right in the middle of Lamentations chapter 3, where you are recognizing the faithfulness of God, where you are recognizing that his mercies are new every day and that he is merciful and compassionate regardless of the state that you feel. You might be this morning sitting right in the midst of Lamentations chapter 5, where you know God is faithful, but you just have no idea what the future holds. You have no idea how or if he is ever even going to rescue you from what you're feeling right now. See, regardless of where you find yourself today, you can lament, you can cry, you can grieve, you can feel those emotions that God has given you, but you can also remember that his mercies are new every day. You can remember that just because his mercies are new every day, that doesn't mean that we won't feel pain. That doesn't mean that we won't have times that are hard. But even in the midst of that pain and that suffering, even in the midst of those hardships, we can still trust that the Lord is in control, and we can still trust that his mercies are new every single day. And his faithfulness to you is so great that he didn't leave you. Regardless of how broken you feel this morning, he did not leave you in a state of brokenness. But his faithfulness came down to, God's faithfulness was revealed in sending his son Jesus. His faithfulness to you was not in just making sure everything feels good, but his faithfulness to you was revealed in his son Jesus, in sending him to die an actual death for you and for me so that we could experience life with him. And you see, this is what the gospel is. It's that we can rely on, that we have experienced love from Jesus, not just in the times that things feel good, but in times when things are down, in times when things are hard, in times where we feel like there is no path forward. Even in the midst of that state, we can rely on the Jesus that has been sent to you and to me. You see, today here in a handful of minutes, we're going to celebrate baptisms. We're going to celebrate two people being baptized. And it's a couple, a girlfriend and a boyfriend, getting baptized together. And what they're doing in being baptized is they're publicly recognizing God's faithfulness to them. And they're publicly declaring their faithfulness back to God. And you see, in a few moments after we take communion, after we spend some time with the Lord, we are going to celebrate with them. But today, this is your invitation, that regardless of where you're at, this is your invitation to come to the Lord. This is your invitation to come to him and be faithful to him, because he has shown that his faithfulness to you is new every single day. He has shown that you can come to him every single day and experience that faithfulness to him. And so what I'd like to do as a close is to read this prayer, to pray this prayer over you and over me. If you're new with us and didn't see them in the lobby, we have these journals that we've been working through this series about how to live a Spirit-led life. And what it is it's just a way for you to take notes. It's just a way for you to write down a little bit that'll help you retain this and help you to think through this during the week. But each week, there is a guided prayer. And I want to encourage you this week, sometime this week, to take some time, take a half hour of your time. Spend some time reading through the entire book of Lamentations and then praying this prayer. Recognize the faithfulness that God has had to you, and in doing so, accept the invitation to be faithful back to him. So if you would, bow your head and pray with me. God, you are faithful, even when I am faithless. God, this world is all-consuming, but because of your great love, I am not consumed. Your compassions never fail. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. Amen.